A source said. There's a phrase you often hear or read in news reports, but what does it mean? Here's investigative journalist and freedom of information campaigner Heather Brooke with her view on anonymity.
When I came, I'd been a journalist in America, I came to Britain, the first thing I saw was that so much of the stories you read in a newspaper have no attribution at all. It'll be a spokesman for this government department, an official for the police, but nowhere would it have a name. Most people don't notice this at first and they think, well, who cares? Who needs to know the names of these people? There's only really one reason why they would be anonymous, and that is to avoid accountability for what they say. If they were confident about what they're saying, they would put their name behind it. End of story. I was trained, as all American journalists are, that you always name your source. It's a really key point. The danger is that because they know their name is not going to be linked with that statement, there's a temptation to bend the truth, to misrepresent the truth, sometimes to just outright lie. As soon as these official spokespeople are named, they're individually accountable, and very often they have to resign. I mean, people think the British press are these, jackals, but the way they just roll over and accept it as if it's fact, as if it's like the word of God has come down and said, this is the way it is, but it isn't a fact.
Well, something to think about there.
An investigator for the paper is said to have deleted some of the messages, giving Millie's parents hope that she was still alive. News International said it was unaware of the allegations until yesterday, and it has now launched its own investigation.
It's the most serious allegation yet in the phone hacking saga, that a missing girl's voicemail was intercepted and a police investigation potentially compromised.
The Guardian have spoken to two completely separate sources.
The damning revelation that murdered schoolgirl Millie Dowler's phone had been hacked and voicemails deleted caused a public outcry. It gave her family false hope she was still alive, it closed the news of the world, and it sparked the inquiry into media ethics. Now there are claims suggesting neither the private investigator Glenn Mulcaire or the paper's journalists deleted the crucial messages. Today, the Leveson inquiry heard they were probably erased automatically.
The most likely explanation is that existing messages automatically dropped off.
And I want you all to know that we are fighting the fake news. It's fake, phony, fake. A few days ago, I called the fake news the enemy of the people, and they are. They are the enemy of the people. Because they have no sources, they just make them up when there are none. I'm against the people that make up stories and make up sources. They shouldn't be allowed to use sources unless they use somebody's name. Let their name be put out there. Let their name be put out.
Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation has moved a step closer to taking full control of BSkyB. The government has provisionally accepted plans to spin off Sky News as a separate company. The Culture Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, agreed the controversial proposals, but he's given opponents 1 week to raise any objections to the deal.
Hello, this is Breakfast with Bill Turnbull and Susanna Reid.
News International executives are expected to meet police today to discuss new phone hacking allegations.
It's claimed that murdered teenager Millie Dowler's phone was hacked and some messages deleted. The Labour leader calls it cruel and immoral. Just after 6 o'clock, good morning. First, our main news this morning. Executives from News International are due to meet police officers this morning to discuss allegations that the News of the World hacked into the mobile phone of the murdered teenager Millie Dowler.
An investigator for the paper is said to have deleted some of the messages, giving Millie's parents hope that she was still alive. News International said it was unaware of the allegations until yesterday, and it has now launched its own investigation.
It's the most serious allegation yet in the phone hacking saga, that a missing girl's voicemail was intercepted and a police investigation potentially compromised.
The Guardian have spoken to two completely separate sources who have told us independently that Scotland Yard have obtained evidence that Millie Dowler's phone was hacked by the News of the World, and they are currently investigating that.
It's alleged that this man, private investigator Glenn Mulcair, carried out the hacking and deleted some of the voicemail messages to make space for new ones. News International said these new allegations were of great concern and they would be cooperating fully with police. Rebecca Brooks was editor of the News of the World at the time. She's now Rupert Murdoch's chief executive in the UK. And Mr Murdoch is involved in a controversial move to take full control of BSkyB, a move that requires government approval. Last night, Labour leader Ed Miliband said it was beyond belief that anyone would undertake such a cruel and immoral act. But some in Parliament say that political leaders have been too easily cowed by the power of the Murdoch empire.
It's time they acted, and that's the biggest scandal of the lot. Politicians are frightened of News International and they need to act.
There are calls for a full judge-led inquiry once the criminal investigation has been completed into what happened in the Millie Dowler case and many others. Andy Moore, BBC News.
Pressure increases on the head of News International UK following allegations that Millie Dowler's phone was hacked into. Rebecca Brooks, who was editor at the News of the World at the time, says she's shocked and appalled by the allegations and has written to Millie's parents saying she will vigorously pursue the truth. It's claimed that Millie's phone was hacked into after she disappeared in 2002 and some messages were deleted, giving the family false hope.
They are true. This is a truly dreadful act and a truly dreadful situation. What I've read in the papers is quite shocking.
Now this man, the private investigator Glenn Mulcair, one of the duo jailed for phone hacking, is accused of targeting the phone of Millie Dowler in the days after she went missing. At that time, in 2002, Mulcair was working for the News of the World. The condemnation has been complete, led by the Prime Minister while on a visit to Afghanistan.
What I've read in the papers is quite shocking that someone could do this, actually knowing that the police were trying to find this person and trying to find out what had happened. And we all now know the tragedy that took place.
So how were Millie's messages allegedly intercepted? After she disappeared, detectives topped up her mobile, so it was still able to receive messages. Gradually it became full, so that no more messages could be left. The Guardian newspaper says Glenn Mulcair hacked into Millie's messages and deleted some of them to create some space, so he could then hack any new messages. For the Dowler family, who only recently saw Millie's killer convicted, there was false hope that Millie herself was deleting the messages and so was still alive. The Guardian newspaper says Glenn Mulcaire hacked into Millie's messages and deleted some of them to create some space, so he could then hack any new messages. For the Dowler family, who only recently saw Millie's killer convicted, there was false hope that Millie herself was deleting the messages and so was still alive. The Guardian newspaper says Glenn Mulcaire hacked into Millie's messages and deleted some of them to create some space, so he could then hack any new messages. For the Dowler family, who only recently saw Millie's killer convicted, there was false hope that Millie herself was deleting the messages and so was still alive. The Guardian newspaper says Glenn Mulcaire hacked into Millie's messages and deleted some of them to create some space, so he could then hack any new messages. For the Dowler family, who only recently saw Millie's killer convicted, there was false hope that Millie herself was deleting the messages and so was still alive.
Mr. Speaker, there cannot be a single person in the land who is not sickened by the news that a private investigator working for the News of the World hacked the phone of the missing teenager Millie Dowler and deleted some of her messages, thereby leading the family to believe that she might still be alive. That's not just a paper out of control. That's not just a paper believing it's above the law. It's a national newspaper playing God with a family's emotions.
So much more immediately disgusting is the headline, which is, the abuse of a teenage girl who was absconded, and the damage it did not only to that the damage it did to that police investigation at the time, how it complicated the affair, and the false hope it gave to her parents, who thought that it must be her deleting her messages.
The phone of Millie Dowler. That anyone could hack into her phone, listen to her family's frantic messages, and delete them, giving false hope to those parents, is immoral and a disgrace.
The News of the World's a paper that is the biggest selling English language paper in the world, and I used to be proud to, first of all, be a reporter there and then to be promoted to deputy features editor. And the last couple of days, it's the first time I felt a little bit ashamed because one private eye seriously overstepped the mark by deleting some messages, and it looked like that a girl who was missing and in fact dead had come alive again. And I can imagine being a parent myself, the devastation.
And of course Millie Dowler, whose parents were given false hope that she was still alive when her voice messages were deleted after her phone was allegedly hacked by a private investigator.
Their attempt to cover up law-breaking and pay for people's silence tell the world all we need to know about their character. That, Mr. Speaker, they are not fit and proper persons to control any part of the media in this country.
Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation wants to buy the 61% of British Sky Broadcasting it doesn't already own. Now, my sources tell me that BSkyB's board had taken the view that News Corporation would have to pay around £9.6 billion for these BSkyB shares. Following today's confirmation by Ofcom, the media regulator, that it has a duty to be satisfied that the holder of a broadcasting licence is fit and proper, there's a risk that the takeover could be blocked or unscrambled.
I disagree on BSkyB, I'm afraid, because I think that these people that the reaction from Rupert Murdoch and from News Corp shows that these are not fit and proper people to run a broadcasting organisation in this country. I don't think that we should be allowing the takeover to go ahead.
And who's the we? Is that Ofcom or is that the Cabinet?
I think it's Ofcom's have to decide whether, but I think that they should be given space to make that decision over the next few months.
Extraordinary breaking news in the last couple of moments or so. News International confirming the final edition of the News of the World will be this Sunday.
With more now on our top story, the turbulent week that led to the closure of the News of the World. It began on Monday with widespread revulsion at the news that the phone of the murdered schoolgirl Millie Dowler had been hacked into. Messages had been deleted which gave false hope to Millie's family.
Now I think we will begin to see them spill out of the building in Wapping, some 270 staff who will be leaving this building, many of them for the last time.
The first thing he should do is he should drop the bid for BSkyB, because he should recognise that with the cloud hanging over his organisation, it's not possible, I don't think, for this bid to go ahead at the current time. And the second thing he should do is show some responsibility in relation to his organisation, because I think it beggars belief.
And what does that mean?
Well, it beggars belief that Rebekah Brooks is still in her post. I mean, Rebekah Brooks was the editor at the time that Millie Dowler's phone was hacked. That was a terrible thing that happened. A deletion of messages, causing further grief to her parents, giving them false hope that she was alive.
The BBC has learned that the Culture Secretary Jeremy Hunt is seeking further advice on Rupert Murdoch's bid to buy the whole of the satellite broadcaster BSkyB. It's emerged he has written to the regulators Ofcom and the Office of Fair Trading in the light of allegations of phone hacking by journalists at the News of the World.
Meanwhile, the family of the murdered schoolgirl Millie Dowler are to meet the Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg today to discuss concerns that her phone may have been hacked and that some messages were deleted.
As a result of News Corporation's announcement this afternoon, I am now going to refer this to the Competition Commission with immediate effect, and will be writing to them this afternoon.
Good morning. First, our main news this morning. The Conservatives will join forces with Labour and the Liberal Democrats today in backing a parliamentary call for Rupert Murdoch to abandon his plan to take full control of BSkyB.
Rupert Murdoch, the great news mogul, in the news for what he would see as the wrong reasons. Putting on a brave face before one of the great humiliations of his career, the abandonment of his attempt to own all of British Sky Broadcasting. Here's News Corporation's explosive statement. We believed that the proposed acquisition of BSkyB by News Corporation would benefit both companies, but it's become clear that it's too difficult to progress in this climate.
Mr. Murdoch himself met the family of the murdered schoolgirl Millie Dowler yesterday. His journalists are alleged to have hacked into her messages and even deleted some. He is said to have held his head in his hands as he apologised to them several times.
Now on BBC One and in high definition on BBC One HD, in a change to the Build episode, a panorama special.
For decades, one man has wielded extraordinary power in Britain.
Murdoch had had this complete control of the Parliament, the government, and even, I'm sorry to say, the police.
Now a murdered schoolgirl threatens to destroy his power after the News of the World was forced to admit that it hacked into her voicemail and deleted messages.
That suddenly struck people as disgusting, and I think that was the end of it for the Murdoch empire.
Did you apologise to
After 2 weeks of revelations, resignations, apologies and arrests, Rupert Murdoch is fighting to save his reputation.
Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you!
This will prove to have been the biggest scandal in British politics for the best part of 75 years.
And one by one, more and more people have been told that they too were the victims of phone hacking. Until one name changed everything. 13-year-old Millie Dowler went missing on her way home from school 9 years ago. During the search for Millie, the News of the World didn't just hack into her phone. Finding that her voicemail was full, messages were deleted to make room for more.
It crossed a line somewhere in the kind of national consciousness. Well, that's enough.
You can do a whole bunch of other stuff, but you can't do that.
Millie's parents were told about the phone hacking by the police just before the recent trial of her killer. They contacted solicitor Mark Lewis.
All of a sudden you could see the real human effect of parents who were clinging on to hope that their daughter was alive. And the News of the World had given them that false hope, given them something to cling on to, that she was alive.
When you start hacking into the phone of a 13-year-old murder victim, even altering the evidence, deleting some of the messages and so on, that suddenly struck people as disgusting. Disgusting. And I think that was the end of it for the Murdoch empire.
News International had started by saying just one rogue journalist was involved. Now they shut down Britain's biggest selling newspaper and put 200 journalists out of work.
A very good evening, live from Westminster at the end of a dramatic day. The owner of Britain's largest media company, Rupert Murdoch, has appeared before MPs to answer questions about the phone hacking scandal, telling them it was the most humble day of his life. Mr. Murdoch insisted he was not responsible for the practice, blaming those he trusted to run his newspapers. Well, the proceedings were interrupted as a demonstrator tried to attack Rupert Murdoch and his son James as they answered those questions from MPs. Well, James Murdoch admitted to that committee that News International had made payments to private detectives.
Good morning. First, our main story today. The former editor of the Daily Mirror, Piers Morgan, has been urged to return to the UK to explain comments he made about phone hacking. It follows the latest allegations, this time involving Mirror Group newspapers.
Yes, Heather Mills, the former wife of Sir Paul McCartney, has claimed in a BBC interview that a senior journalist at the company admitted hacking into her phone.
The Mirror. No surprise that it's published endless stories on the likes of George Michael, Kirsty Young, Mick Jagger, Peter Mandelson and Will Carling. More surprising, perhaps, is that the Mirror employed a controversial firm of private detectives, Southern Investigations, to get these stories and vast numbers of others. A BBC investigation has discovered that between October 1997 and September 1999, Southern Investigations was employed on 230 occasions by the Daily and Sunday Mirror and billed almost £67,000 for its services. Now, many media organisations, including the BBC, have employed private detectives, but on average, Southern was doing 2 pieces of work each week for the Mirror.
The press provides an essential check on all aspects of public life. That is why any failure within the media affects all of us. At the heart of this inquiry, therefore, may be one simple question: who guards the guardians?
Yet this inquiry will look far beyond the News of the World. Indeed, it was suggested today other newspapers ignored the scandal because they have their own guilty secrets.
The rest of the newspaper industry took a pass on the News of the World phone hacking story, almost certainly because they too were involved in dark arts.
Now, in other news today, Tony Blair's former spin doctor Alistair Campbell has said in a witness statement to the Press Standards inquiry that the Daily Mirror could have learned about Cherie Blair's pregnancy through phone hacking. He said only a handful of people knew and didn't find credible the stories he was told about how the information got out. He also severely criticised the integrity of today's press.
Let's speak now to our political correspondent Ross Hawkins, who's been listening at the inquiry in central London. And what's been said at the moment, Ross?
Well, as outside the inquiry, you can see the police here preparing for a protest march. Inside, there's a suggestion from a former policeman that maybe the whole story of phone hacking could have been blown apart 8 whole years ago. He led an investigation for the Information Commissioner into the work of one private detective and found documents with 17,500 individual entries listing requests for information from journalists from papers right across the spectrum, not just News International ones, and many of those requests related to information you simply could not have got legally. In the end, they did go after private detectives, but he says he was told to keep away from and not to question any journalists at all. And he is raising the possibility that the authorities knew there was something deeply, deeply wrong in British journalism, that there was a prospect of many criminal convictions, and that they simply looked the other way.
This is Sky News with Kay Burley.
Hello, very good afternoon. The Guardian newspaper has defended its original story that journalists from the News of the World deleted crucial voicemails belonging to Millie Dowler. The paper now says police have new evidence Millie's voicemails weren't deleted by the tabloid when she first went missing. The deletion of the messages made Millie's parents believe she was still alive and led to the setting up of the Leveson inquiry into press ethics. Well, this is the front page of The Guardian from the 5th of July this year, with the headline, News of the World hacked Millie Dowler's phone during police hunt. It included the phrase the messages were deleted by journalists in the first few days after Millie's disappearance in order to free up space for more messages. Well, this is what Millie Dowler's mother told the Leveson inquiry last month about how the deletion of voicemails gave her false hope.
We were sitting downstairs in reception and I rang her phone.
Yes.
And it clicked through onto her voicemail, so I heard her voice.
Yes.
And it was just like I jumped. She's picked up her voicemails, Bob, she's alive! And I was just, it was then, really. But like I told my friends, oh, she's picked up her voicemail,
yes.
She's picked up her voicemail.
Hi Jill, thanks for joining us here on Sky News this afternoon. And we've been hearing suggestions that as far as Millie Dowler's phone is concerned, it wasn't the News of the World that deleted the messages that were left giving her family false hope. Does it really matter whether the message was deleted by the News of the World or not? They do accept that they were listening to them.
Look, there's no getting away from the fact that it was absolutely indefensible that the News of the World listened into Millie Dowler's phones. But what is crucial at this juncture is the whole issue of deletions. It was reported as fact by The Guardian in July that the News of the World deliberately deleted those messages to make way for new messages so that they could gain stories about her disappearance. That now we know, certainly at the time of her appearance, not to be the case. That was reported by The Guardian with certainty in July. It was a key factor in the backlash against the News of the World. It was a key factor in the closure of the News of the World. Now The Guardian are accepting that that's wrong. They buried the story away on Friday night, and they're finally facing the consequences for that today. Look, I'm not here to defend the accessing of the messages. What I'm here to say is the whole reporting of this story has been led by The Guardian, whose reporting has been accepted as fact by the rest of the media, and all I'm saying to the media as a whole today is there are two sides to every issue. Let's wait for the conclusion of Leveson, let's wait for the criminal trial, and let's just not treat everything The Guardian says as fact. There's been no apology, there's been no real acceptance that they got it wrong. You had Nick Davis on your show earlier basically saying that they still don't know what happened about the deletions. Well, I wish you'd known that in July, Nick.
So what would you, at the very least, you would like to see a more appropriate apology?
I'd like to see that. I mean, there have been other clear inaccuracies in The Guardian coverage which they have apologised for in a small corrections column which they have in the paper. There's the instance of them accusing the Sun of basically hacking into Gordon Brown's medical records, which was proved to be completely untrue. They smeared a former News of the World executive, Ray Chapman, for saying that he had a drink problem, he had to tape all his conversations. That turned out to be completely untrue and caused enormous offence to his widow. All I'm saying is The Guardian have a huge agenda. Please, the media, treat everything they say with a large pinch of salt.
Correspondent Ross Hawkins, listening to all of that, another development to the Millie Dowler hacking story. Just explain what's emerged in the last 20 minutes or so.
This can sound very complicated, but it's central to this inquiry and it's absolutely crucial. In July, The Guardian published the claim that the News of the World was responsible for deleting messages that led Millie Dowler's mother, Sally Dowler, to believe her daughter was alive because she checked her phone, she checked the voice messages on that telephone system, and some had been deleted. It gave her the false hope that her daughter was alive. Of course, she was not. She'd been murdered. Now, what was revealed on Saturday on page 10 of The Guardian was its reporters writing that actually that was not correct. Police had done more investigations. While the News of the World had indeed hacked into Millie Dowler's voice messages, they had not taken part in those deletions that led Sally Dowler to wrongly believe her daughter was alive. And what we've just heard is from the barristers confirming, in essence, some of the details that the News of the World told a private detective they were working with to hack into this phone after those deletions took place. And crucially, that the most likely explanation for what happened is they'd simply been automatically deleted by the voicemail system itself. This does not clear the News of the World of hacking. It does not even clear the News of the World of hacking Millie Dowler's phone, which, as we've heard, has been broadly accepted. But what it does say is that a crucial element of the story that led to the prime ministerial comment, the public disgust that led to this inquiry being set up, was inaccurate.
But briefly, that is what Glenn Mulcair, the private investigator, has always maintained as well.
It was the story that ignited public revulsion, placed the press under intense scrutiny, and brought the News of the World's presses to a halt. It was the claim by The Guardian last July that the News of the World had hacked into the phone of the missing schoolgirl Millie Dowler, and that the paper had deleted messages from her voicemail. It was this latter action, the deleting of messages, that Millie's mother Sally told the inquiry last month had given her hope.
I rang her phone.
Yes.
And it clicked through onto her voicemail, so I heard her voice.
Yes.
And it was just like I jumped. She's picked up her voicemails, Bob. She's alive. And I was just, it was then, really.
The News of the World investigator Glenn Mulcair has always denied deleting Millie Dowler's voicemail messages, and today the inquiry heard that the Metropolitan Police had discovered email evidence to support that.
It's unlikely that anything Mr. Mulcair did was responsible for what Mrs. Dowler heard when she called Millie's phone.
Why does this matter? Well, what happened to the Dowlers had a significance in causing this whole inquiry to be set up, and as much in deference to their feelings as anything else. Lord Justice Leveson said he would try to get to the bottom of what really did happen. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News, at the Leveson inquiry.
It was arguably one of the most significant articles ever published by British journalists about British journalists. The hacking of Millie Dowler's phone by the News of the World, as revealed exclusively by The Guardian. They hadn't just hacked into her voicemail, said the paper, they'd even deleted them, giving the family false hope that she might have been alive. The messages, asserted the article, were deleted by journalists in the first few days after Millie's disappearance in order to free up space for more messages. As a result, friends and relatives of Millie concluded wrongly that she might still be alive. Reported as fact, this was the article which transformed the phone hacking story. It triggered an astonishing sequence of events which led to the closure after 168 years of the News of the World, to the self-proclaimed humbling of Rupert Murdoch, to resignations at Scotland Yard, and to an inquiry at which the Dowlers themselves recalled the false hope generated when it appeared that Millie's messages had been deleted.
And I rang her phone.
Yes.
And it clicked through onto her voicemail, so I heard her voice.
Yes.
And it was just like I jumped. She's picked up her voicemails, Bob. She's alive. And I was just, it was then, really.
For more than 5 months, this allegation that the News of the World had been behind the deletion of Millie Dowler's voicemails went largely unchallenged and prompted endless comment about the appalling depths to which this now-defunct tabloid had once sunk. But then over the weekend, there was a striking development when the Guardian journalist who first broke this story admitted, actually, this story has shifted.
Television and radio bosses, including the Director General of the BBC, Mark Thompson, gave evidence here at Leveson. He was asked about this controversial question about hiring private detectives, and he said that over 6 years the BBC had spent around £310,000 on private detectives, but he gave examples of stories where he said it had been in the public interest, for example trying to track down a paedophile. He also said he thought it was quite desirable that the newspapers were less regulated than the broadcasters. Meanwhile, Channel 4 News' Jim Gray said there had been 2 occasions where they had used private detectives in the recent past.
Exposed. The full details of newspapers who were paying an investigator hundreds of thousands of pounds for phone numbers, addresses and other information, large amounts of it potentially illegal. These are the Motorman files, which ITV News has for the first time had full access to. And from the 4 coloured Motorman books, it's possible to see many of the potentially illegal transactions over a 3-year period up until 2003. From those that can be categorised and some can't, the most requests were from 65 journalists working for the Daily Mail and its weekend magazine. 1,728 transactions, almost double discovered by the Information Commissioner, including Kate and Pippa Middleton's details. We've calculated the Mail paid Whittemore £143,000 for this potentially illegal information. According to what we've seen in the books, the next biggest spenders were the Daily Mirror, who spent more than £92,000 on potentially illegal information and made nearly 1,000 requests. Close behind the Mirror is their stablemate The People, spending more than £76,000 requesting 1,000 potentially illegal searches. Other newspapers spending on potentially illegal searches in the Motorman files include the Mail on Sunday, spending £62,000. The Evening Standard spent £29,500. The Sunday Mirror, £27,000. The News of the World is revealed to have spent more than £23,000. The Daily Express and the Observer both spent £13,000. But there were also several boxes of invoices with not as much detail as the books, so it's impossible to tell for these what was legal and what was potentially illegal. But they do show the newspapers were actually spending much bigger amounts of money for Steve Whittemore's information, although we can't say what for. We found News International spent nearly £500,000. Trinity Mirror spent £376,000. Associated Newspapers, publishers of the Mail, spent £268,000. Express Newspapers spent £95,000. The BBC, ITV and others used Whittemore. ITN, which makes ITV News, spent £141 with him.
It's been 10 years, 1 month and 9 days since News of the World hacked Millie Dowler's phone. 5 days ago, Rupert Murdoch admitted there was a cover-up at News Corporation. We found News Corporation carried out an extensive cover-up of its rampant law-breaking. Its most senior executives repeatedly misled Parliament, and the 2 men at the top, Rupert and James Murdoch, who were in charge of the company, must now answer for that. In the view of the majority of committee members, Rupert Murdoch is not fit to run an international company like BSkyB.
The report was only passed by 6 votes to 4 as a result, particularly of the conclusion about Rupert Murdoch. I think many people will conclude, unfortunately, because I think it may well detract from the unanimous recommendations of the committee. I think some people may conclude that some people's conclusions were written before any of the evidence was ever heard or gone over, and I think that's very sad too. People will see that there was a majority of 2 on the committee for these things. People may also want to notice that 2 of those people who voted for those things weren't even on the committee to listen to any of the evidence at the time, and yet felt sufficiently strongly to vote for those rather controversial recommendations. To me, quite clearly, Rupert Murdoch is a fit person to run a major international company. He's been running businesses since before I was born. He's run successful businesses. He's employed hundreds of thousands of people around the world. He's made a huge difference to the media industry. We have seen absolutely no evidence to suggest that Rupert Murdoch was aware of any of these things that were going on at News International, at News of the World. If I thought he'd have been aware of what was going on and he deliberately covered it up and maybe committed any crime in doing so, then I would have been happy to say I don't think he's a fit person to run a company. We've seen absolutely no evidence to suggest that was the case. Yes, of course, he's made mistakes. Of course, James Murdoch's made mistakes. Making mistakes, we all make mistakes. I make dozens every day. Hands up anyone here who hasn't made a mistake. We all make mistakes. We all wish we'd done things differently from time to time, and hindsight can be a wonderful thing. But to take that to say that this person is not a fit person to run a major international company when he's been doing that for decades seems to me to be not only way over the top, but also completely ludicrous.
The bottom line is we had no evidence on this. And it seemed to me that even in a report as partisan and down political lines as this one was voted on, no member of the committee could find it in their hearts to say that either James or Rupert Murdoch had misled the committee. Nobody, even in the report as it's published. Therefore, it did appear to us that something negative had to be found to say about Rupert Murdoch, since nobody was going to conclude that either he or his son had misled our committee. And therefore this line about Rupert Murdoch not being a fit person, which echoes Ofcom's fit and proper test, was stuck in on the basis of no evidence presented to the committee whatsoever, and we just could not support it. As I say, even though many, many votes went against my point of view on James Murdoch and on the corporate culture at News Corporation, I would definitely have voted for the report had that language not been placed in it.
Rupert Murdoch's plan for an £11 billion takeover of Sky is being sent to the regulators. The government said it wants advice on whether the deal is in the public interest. It's the second time that Mr. Murdoch has tried to take control of Sky, but his last effort foundered after the phone hacking scandal at the News of the World. And there are quite a few prominent critics of this merger, not least one Ed Miliband.
Yeah,
What's
they say that the Murdochs already have too much power over the British media, and they're also worried then that he will use that power to bring about the Foxification, if you like, of Sky News rather, such that it is made to become more right-leaning in the way that Fox is seen as being.
Now, a group of senior politicians have met officials at the broadcasting regulator Ofcom to try to block Rupert Murdoch's bid to take full control of Sky. The former Labour leader Ed Miliband, the Lib Dem former business secretary Sir Vince Cable and the former Lord Chancellor, Labour's Lord Faulkner, said that Mr Murdoch's firm, 21st Century Fox, was not fit and proper to take over Sky.
The sexual harassment scandal engulfing Rupert Murdoch's Fox News channel was the subject of an Ofcom hearing today. It is currently considering Mr Murdoch's bid to take over Sky. One of the women making the allegations flew into Britain today to speak to the regulator. Within the last hour, her lawyer claimed there was an epidemic of sexual harassment inside the Murdoch media empire, which meant Ofcom should block the bid.
She's flown here with her lawyer, paid for by the campaign group Avaz, which is also trying to derail Mr Murdoch's bid to take over Sky. Emerging from the meeting today with Ofcom, she had this to say.
We both very strongly believe that Fox should not be allowed to take full ownership of Sky. New cases are being filed every day in the United States. More is yet to come. Given everything that we know about the Murdoch empire, let alone revelations to come, we believe it would be irresponsible for this deal to go through.
One of the women who made those allegations, Wendy Walsh, seen here on the right, even flew to the UK to present her case in person to Ofcom. In its ruling today, the regulator conceded all the allegations were extremely serious, but said there was no clear evidence that executives, including Rupert Murdoch at the parent company Fox, were aware of misconduct prior to a major case hitting the headlines in July 2016, which resulted in the sacking of Fox News boss Roger Ailes. Ailes has since died, stalling a key US federal inquiry into those allegations and business practices inside Fox News. So, on the evidence available to Ofcom, Fox, for now, can be deemed fit and proper. On balance, the Murdochs are probably breathing a sigh of relief today. They've been found to be fit and proper, the big hurdle, and the ball is now firmly in their court to come up with an acceptable solution to ensure the editorial independence of Sky. To many, bar the shouting, this merger is beginning to look more like a done deal. Siobhan Kennedy, Channel 4 News in Westminster.
Rupert Murdoch's £11 billion bid to take full control of Sky has been dealt a blow today after the government said it would ask the competition watchdog to look into the planned takeover by 21st Century Fox. The Culture Secretary, Karen Bradley, said she made the decision over concerns about how a merger would boost Mr Murdoch's media influence. She also asked the watchdog to look into the issue of broadcasting standards at his 21st Century Fox group and particularly at Fox News. Our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy, has this report.
Campaigners were expecting the government to roll over to Rupert Murdoch to edge him closer on his way to securing the whole of Sky and combining it with his Fox empire in the US. But as they listened to the Culture Secretary Karen Bradley today, they got an unexpected surprise. For rather than going easy on the Murdochs, Mrs Bradley instead turned the screw.
I have taken careful account of all relevant representations and Ofcom's advice, and have today, as required by the legislation, written to the parties to inform them that I am now minded to refer the merger to the CMA on the grounds of genuine commitment to broadcasting standards.
She's referring to the Competition and Markets Authority, which will now conduct a 6-month review. Loosely translated, things just got a lot more tricky for Rupert Murdoch. We already knew the Culture Secretary was likely to refer 21st Century Fox's takeover of Sky on competition grounds, and she confirmed that today. But unexpectedly, she also said she was minded to refer them on grounds of its commitment to broadcasting standards here in the UK. That's based on her concerns about the way Fox handled a string of sexual and racial harassment allegations and accusations of false news reporting in the US, as well as concerns about past phone hacking by a Murdoch newspaper here.
Now, it's a media mega deal. Rupert Murdoch is selling the vast majority of his 21st Century Fox media empire to a larger rival Disney. But what does the £39 billion deal mean for his attempts to take control of the British broadcaster Sky? Our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy, has this.
The $52.4 billion deal will see it acquire the movie arm of 20th Century Fox a stake in Hulu, the all-important up-and-coming rival to Netflix, and a string of TV and cable companies, including the 39% stake Fox holds in Sky in the UK. And what remains at 21st Century Fox will morph into a new spin-off called simply Fox that will include the highly profitable Fox News, business and sports channels that Rupert Murdoch now plans to expand.
We're joined in the studio here by Ed Miliband, the former Labour Party leader, and joining us from Los Angeles, Anushka Sekawi, entertainment reporter for the financial broadcaster Bloomberg. The question this side of the Atlantic is what happens to the Sky-Fox deal, the anxiety that Sky News will be taken over by the madcap Fox News outfit?
If it doesn't go through, it's really unclear what happens.
Ed Miliband, your concern is what happens to Sky News and whether Fox do get hold of it. What's your view at the moment?
I think the big picture here is for all of my political lifetime, your journalistic lifetime, Rupert Murdoch has been acquiring power, more and more power. And our worry was that he was going to acquire Sky News, get complete control of Sky News and turn it into Fox News. I think that prospect is not going to happen now. I mean, I think if this deal goes through, that idea is dead and buried. And that interview with Rupert Murdoch that you showed, he's quite mournful about selling off Sky. I think it's good for our broadcasting landscape in this country, because I don't think we want Fox News here. The concern here was, this is a man, Rupert Murdoch, who still has a powerful newspaper network, a powerful radio network. We've seen scandals at Fox, the sexual harassment scandals. We see sort of the bile that it pours out, the way it poisons the political discourse in the United States.
Fox's planned takeover of Sky isn't in the public interest. That's according to the competition watchdog. The Competition and Markets Authority says allowing the Murdoch family's company to go ahead with the deal would give them too much influence over public opinion and the political agenda. Fox has been trying to buy the 61% of Sky that it doesn't already own. Our media editor Amal Rajan is here. We'll talk about what's happened since in a moment, but in some ways you could argue Rupert Murdoch saw this coming because, well, they're saying you would have too much control.
Yeah, and this is it's worth saying, Simon, this is the second time he's tried to take full control, of course. Back in 2010-11, Rupert Murdoch and his family bid through BSkyB, as it then was, for the 61% of Sky they didn't own. That was scuppered by the phone hacking scandal at his newspapers. The whole thing became too politically toxic, and Murdoch decided he had to pull out of that bid. This time, fast forward 5 or 6 years, they bid again, especially through James Murdoch, and this time it's been stuck in the regulatory quagmire for best part of a year. First of all, Ofcom said they didn't like the look of it on the grounds of media plurality, and now the Competition and Markets Authority has come to the same view as you say.
And then, the middle of last month, the news that, well, Disney wants to buy the very bits of Sky that we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, this was a shock. It's a shock to most people in the industry. It's a shock to pretty much everyone who isn't Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch is exiting UK media in terms of entertainment. His Fox empire, which does both news, live news and sport and entertainment, he was going to sell up to Disney and Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney. So this came as a huge shock. And in a sense, I mean, this gets a bit chewy, but in a sense, there are two regulatory processes here. There's one which is the UK one, looking at whether or not Murdoch should be granted full control. And then there's the American regulatory process, which is Disney's takeover of Fox. And in a weird sense, whatever Ofcom or the CMA, the Competition Markets Authority, say about the UK deal, that's going to be superseded by the American process. And if Disney get control of Fox, as looks quite likely, then all of the concerns about media plurality will, in a sense, fall away, because the toxicity of the Murdoch name, the fact that his family has such control, won't be an issue if Disney's in charge.
But the future of Sky News, which is at the heart of this, is that assured if Disney takes over? Because what commitment is there from Disney that they'll keep it?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting and complicated. So Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney, has said in his own sort of public pronouncements on it that he is committed to Sky News. And Sky News is obviously a key part of the Sky subscription, if you like. People that pay for Sky obviously like the idea of Sky News. As you know, having worked there for a long time, it's a world-class product and it's vital competition, a lot of people would say, to the very dominant BBC. On the other hand, if you're Disney and you're specialists in entertainment, Sky News is a loss-making operation, which is, as we've been discussing, stuck in this kind of regulatory sort of mess. So it might be that it's a complication Disney feel they can do without. I think on balance, Disney probably don't want, if they move into UK media in a big way, they probably don't want as their first move to sack a bunch of journalists who produce world-class journalism. So I think it's probably likely that Disney will keep control of Sky News. But there is, at the end of all this time, this weirdness that We're in a situation where concerns over media plurality have stopped Rupert Murdoch taking full control of Sky. But if Disney, as you suggest, if Disney come over and say, you know what, we don't want Sky News, then you really do have an issue with media plurality, because I think most people would argue, I would certainly argue, that Sky News does produce world-class journalism, and it's important that there is a counterweight to the very, very mighty BBC. So the whole question of media plurality at the moment is going to be in a very different place in 3 or 4 months' time, when we're going to be sat here talking about what Disney are going to do now they've entered the UK media space.
Well, with me now is the former Labour leader, Ed Miliband, who strongly opposed the Sky-Fox deal. If this deal was blocked, the sword of Damocles hangs over Sky News, and that would then damage. If Sky News was closed, it would damage media plurality.
Well,
you would have shot yourself.
It's not going to close. I think that's a piece of blackmail. It's one of the weapons in the Murdoch armoury, the threat to close Sky News, and the regulators seen through it.
It is loss-making, though, as John Whittingdale just pointed out.
Cathy, this is a very significant decision today. I think John Whittingdale was massively underplaying it. It's significant because the regulator is saying that if this deal went ahead, Rupert Murdoch would have too much control over public policy and the political agenda. Now, they're partly saying that because of all of his interests that we know about, newspapers, radio, and then it would be TV, but also the way he uses that power. It's not like Channel 4 News.
But is he the power that he was?
Well, he wants to be. He wants to be. Look, just look at Fox News. He is now in direct charge of Fox News in the United States. Day after day, it is spewing out a right-wing agenda. You know, really part of the political apparatus of Donald Trump. And the fear was always, if he gets control over Sky News, he could turn it into Fox News.
But as John Whittingdale said, there are regulations in place in this country that would prevent that.
Yeah, but the CMA looked at that, as did Ofcom. And the regulations go only so far. Story selection, tone. You're not regulated for those things. You can't regulate, you shouldn't regulate for those things.
So-called cash for questions affair did enormous damage to the Conservative Party.
He then damaged the credibility of John Major's Back to Basics government with the cash for questions affair.
It was evidence of sleaze which helped bring down the last Conservative government.
The allegation of actually picking up brown envelopes containing thousands of pounds, there was no proof of, oddly enough.
He also unfairly got caught up in something that I think the media are much more culpable for than politicians. and that was his whole government was seen through the prism of sleaze.
The media has a responsibility to investigate our investigation.